So it's great to be here again. It's a great conference and great seminar room as well. So thank you, Christine. So I'm going to talk to you about work we're doing in Berkeley. So this is Berkeley, by the way. It's a Golden Gate Bridge. And about quantum sensing. And there's not been much quantum sensing in this conference so far. So first I thought I'll give you some overview about quantum sensing and then in particular talk about these deployable sensors. I should say that most of the field in quantum sensing has been on QuDits, like two-level systems. And well, there's an expansion towards higher level systems, but and I'll mention that, but still a lot of it is going to be qubit going into 3 levels. But we do exploit these 3-level systems very intimately in the sensing I'm going to tell you. Okay, so first, what is quantum sensing? So, well, quantum sensing is you use the fragility of quantum states in order to sense things. And quantum states are very fragile, so you can make very good sensors out of them. And the various types of quantum sensors to detect all kinds of things, as we'll discuss later. But you can imagine, as any sensor is, you can characterize some figures of merit. So, sensitivity, speed, throughput, how large it is, how much power it takes, et cetera. And and what I'm going to show you, so you can imagine you can use Rydberg atoms, very good electrometers in detection electric fields, or you can use spins, and they are very good sensors of magnetic fields. But what I'm going to show you today, I really want to make these quantum sensors interact with the real world. So we're going to go away from cryostats, vacuum chambers, and instead take these quantum sensors into dirty environments, environments where they are intimately in contact with other things that you can detect. Okay? And so that's the focus of this talk. So all of it is going to be at room temperature, although we do stuff at low temperature as well, but today I'm going to speak to you only about stuff at room temperature. To give you some overview first about spin-based quantum sensing, this is like a little bird's eye view on the various things one can imagine doing. Some have been done already, and some are being actively pursued by several people in the community on a spin-based quantum sensing. Some ideas are to use porous materials lined with quantum sensors. I'm going to describe this later on, but to then spin polarized materials inside these porous materials. So I'm in the chemistry department, and we work a lot with these things called metal organic frameworks. I'll describe this later, but they're highly designer, porous materials. You can tune the size of these pores, and you can line these pores with quantum sensing materials, and you can either sense or polarize materials with it. And this is an active area of research. Other things are you can interrogate single molecules with these quantum sensors. It's very popular about a decade ago, where you have a single spin, for example, an NV center, and then you have a molecule, and you interrogate something about the molecule, including where the spins are in that molecule. Scanning surfaces with a quantum sensor on a tip. This is a very popular and commercially successful angle. There's about 3 companies doing this already, and take a quantum sensor, take an AFM tip and attach a quantum sensor on its tip and move around surfaces. I'm going to tell you about this today. This is a new angle that we are pursuing at Berkeley. This is to make chemical assays very sensitive. Basically, you can imagine a COVID test with about 10,000 times better sensitivity using quantum sensors. I'm going to describe that. A lot of applications in living cells. You can put quantum sensors inside cells and organisms. So this is as dirty as it gets, I guess. And lastly, monitoring chemical reactions with sensors at sort of the nanoscale. So, well, these are some, let's say, aspirational, many of them aspirational, but I think very exciting directions by which quantum sensors can be applied. And you're really trying to interface them with the real world in these examples. So I wanted to give you an overview of the kind of things that quantum sensors can do. So I'm going to start with some introduction, and then I'm going to talk about deployable sensors. And then I'm going to focus some attention on these flow-based sensors for very sensitive assays. And finally, tell you about new materials where quantum sensors can be applied, especially in chemical systems where I think it's very exciting. A lot of interesting things one could do with it. Right, okay, so some overview first about quantum sensors. A very pretty diagram from Patrick Malatinsky on a quantum sensor attached to an AFM tip. And so the classic quantum sensor that most people use and like are these defects in semiconductor material. So the classic material is NV center in diamond. It's a nitrogen replacing a carbon atom with vacancy nearby. And well, it's an electron that can be optically spin polarized and optically interrogated or optically read out. And well, it so happens it's a 3-level system, and this 3-level system is advantageous for a lot of the sensing tasks that we will use. And I don't want to go into much detail about how this works, but it's very simply, if you take an NV center and you shine light on it, you can spin polarize it, which means the entire population of the electron would come on this ground state here. And you can read out the electronic state because it turns out that the fluorescence is spin state dependent. So one state is brighter and one state is darker, and you can tell which state you started with, and so you can get a state dependent fluorescence readout. And so these are the sort of two properties that are widely used in order to use these as sensors. So these materials are very easy to make. They are very low cost, so these are diamond particles. The advantage of these particles is you can stick them on things and put them into objects. These are large particles, and you can make them as small as maybe 5 nanometers or so. Highly resilient. The surfaces can be controlled. They're biocompatible, and the fluorescence is non-bleaching. Okay? So anyway, so I'm giving you still some background, and it turns out that this transition at zero magnetic field, at independent of temperature, is around 2.87 gigahertz. And so you can actually excite the spin state by applying microwaves at this frequency. And because of this sort of spin state dependent fluorescence, if you were to just monitor the fluorescence, you would get this spectrum. This is called an optically detected magnetic. There's an ODMR spectrum of this NV center, and you can see this. Very easy to see. And this all works because, well, this is a 3-level system, and there is like this intrinsic zero field splitting in the lattice for free, and very convenient. So even without a magnetic field, you have a very clear microwave transition. Okay, so one way in which you can use this as a sensor is to just look at this contrast that you get here, and then it turns out that this contrast depends on the NV center's T1, which is its lifetime, and the T1 is dependent on environmental, things that are in the environment of the spin. So for example, if you were to put the spin in the proximity of some things that would cause the NV center to relax, then it would turn out that this contrast decreases, and you can make a very good sensor out of that. So this is an example of detecting paramagnetic ions. So it turns out this NV center can be used very sensitively to detect paramagnetic ions. And I'll show you more about this later. But this is to say it's very convenient, it's very low cost, and you can take this with nanodiamonds, and you can do this at room temperature. So you might say, okay, all that's well and good, so can you tell me one example where quantum sensors can have real-world impact? And I really like this paper, which came out from the group in England 2-3 years ago, and that is to make a COVID test with nanodiamond particles. So if you know anything about how COVID tests work, and all of us have taken COVID tests, but this is called a lateral flow assay, and it has gold nanoparticles that are connected to an antibody, and the gold nanoparticle is a mobile phase and a stationary phase, and the gold nanoparticles are moving on this strip. And this line that you see are basically gold nanoparticles lining up in a particular area, and that's what you detect. And you're looking at essentially the inherent fluorescence of these gold nanoparticles. So it turns out that this is not very sensitive. If you go down to the question is, can you detect one gold nanoparticle? And the answer is no. And so what these guys did, I'm just going to skip over here, is in this paper, they made a lateral flow assay with nanodiamonds. And all it is you replace gold nanoparticles with nanodiamonds, and you use the fact that because this has a microwave transition, if you were to excite this microwave transition, the fluorescence gets modulated. And you can modulate this fluorescence at a rate that's just given by the microwave power that you use, or the microwave frequency. It depends on how you do it. And so essentially, you can make this fluorophore modulatable. And this allows you to then detect things at very, very low concentrations, so by essentially a lock-in measurement. So anything in the environment that's not modulated at frequency can be suppressed, and you can only see the only see the nanodiamond particles because they modulated this very specific frequency. And with this, they were able to show, this is sensitivity is a function of nanodiamond concentration, but essentially they were able to show sensitivity at 800 zeptomolar, which turns out to be a 4 order of magnitude improvement over a lateral flow assay. Conventional lateral flow assay. So it's a very interesting result. It's actually very simple. Its simplicity is quite amazing. It's just use the fact that you have this fluorophore that can be modulated. The disadvantage is, well, you need a laser and microwave, so it's not cost effective for a lateral flow assay, and so it's not $1 anymore. But it shows the potential for making chemical sensors out of these nanodiamond-like particles, and that's what we're going to exploit later in this talk. Now I'm going to just tell you some other things you can do. So this diamond has NV centers, but also has nuclear spins. And diamond is pure carbon. It turns out carbon-13 is a nuclear spin that comes at 1% abundance. So you can just imagine this chunk of diamond is a bunch of nuclear spins all interacting with each other. And it turns out the nuclear spins themselves can be used as sensors. I'm not going to talk about it too much in this talk, but I want to tell you that these spins are amazing. They are highly easy to control. They're very, very long T1s and T2s, and they're very abundant, and they're easy to control. So we apply more than 4 to 10 million pulses. And this is not the subject of my talk today, but I want to tell you that using the NV Center's 3-level system properties, it's possible to actually polarize or initialize these nuclear spins. Usually these nuclear spins, while they have amazing properties, like the T1 of carbon and diamond is 1 hour, T1 of proton and pentacene, another very important molecule which I'll describe, is 800 hours. It's like 2.5 months. Usually the signal is so low that you can't detect it. And it's possible through some techniques using the 3-level property of this NV center that you can actually spin polarize, shine light, the NV center gets polarized, and you transfer the polarization, the nuclear spins, and the nuclear spins get polarized, and this thing just lights up, and it's got a very high signal to noise. Okay, so this blue line is a signal that you would get for interrogating these nuclear spins through a technique called NMR, is how you would read out these nuclear spins. This blue line is after like 8 hours of averaging. 8 hours of averaging, and the red line is after like 10 or 20 seconds. So you get a very large signal enhancement by, again, using the electron that you can optically polarize to actually then polarize the nuclear spins. What I want to tell you is that these nuclear spins themselves can act as sensors because now you can initialize them very well, and they've got very long coherence times. So it turns out that if you were to just start with these nuclear spins, tip them, and look at how they process in a magnetic field, they would process in about 1.5 to 2 milliseconds. And well, in some communities, that's a large number, but usually it's a kind of a small number, so 1.5 milliseconds. And that's dominated by interactions between the nuclear spins. But it turns out that if you do some control techniques, which nowadays people call it fashionably flow-K control, but it's possible then to extend this quite dramatically at room temperature. So it's nuclear spins in nanodiamond or microdiamond particles. You can extend this from something like a millisecond or 2 milliseconds to approaching 90 seconds, and in more recent work, even further, like 600 seconds or so. And this is just by applying a large number of these control pulses on these nuclear spins, in this case about 6 million pulses, and we observe these things continuously in one shot because the readout is non-destructive. Anyway, so I don't want to go into much technical detail, but I want to say that this long lifetime, which I'm calling T2 prime, can actually be used for sensing, because it turns out that if you were to take these nuclear spins, which are kind of aligned on this axis now, and just expose them to a weak magnetic field, then on top of this thing that was previously flat, you would get these oscillations. These oscillations are a direct imprint of the magnetic field that they're exposed to, and you can make very sensitive sensors. You just have to initialize them for a few seconds, and then you can read them out for like many, many minutes. So, the take-home message from this is these semiconductor materials are amazing because you can use the electron as a sensor, and you can use the nuclear spin as a sensor, and the electron is used to initialize the nuclear spins that are then used as a sensor. So there's 2 sensors in one. Okay, so I want to go down to the main focus of what I want to tell you about, which is what you can do with these nanodiamond particles when you actually try to interface them with the real world, sort of make them deployable to locations of interest. We became very interested with 3D printing, so my students have started 3D printing diamond, and it turns out it's very easy because diamond is a material that doesn't react with anything, so you mix it with 3D printing filament, and then you can make all kinds of structures. So this is a diamond boat. This is a diamond porous structure with the diamond incorporated in the walls of this material. This is another type of 3D printing, if you like. This is called bubble printing. So you take gold substrate and you have a laser, and basically this whole thing just compactifies the diamond, and they get stuck by van der Waals interaction. So this is Cal, and this is there's a pretty picture here, which is diamonds that are just stuck on a surface with these manufacturing techniques. And so you can really assemble all kinds of complicated shapes of these diamond nanoparticles, and then these particles themselves can act as sensors. So here's more. This picture is not very good, but this is a SEM picture of this of a 3-dimensional structure called a gyroid, which is provably the highest surface area structure, and it's got nanodiamonds all over. You can't see it so well here, but this is a confocal image of the same structure, where we are looking at the autofluorescence of the structure that's green in color, and these red things are nanodiamonds. And you can see that the nanodiamonds are made in this particular way of manufacturing to line only the walls of the material. So all these red spots are nanodiamond particles. And so you have this highly porous structure that's quite large, hundreds of microns, and it's lined with these nanodiamond particles, and we're trying to make flow-based sensors out of this. So it really means that you can put these particles where you like them. Here's another example. I got funded by the DOE to study roots. And initially I thought, what the heck, why would you study roots? But it turns out I went to this conference and there are 500 people only studying roots. And there are many interesting questions about roots or plant uptake that are not easy to study because it's inside a soil environment. And so, well, we fed nanodiamonds to roots and, well, the plant just takes it up. You might see this in the news often about microplastic uptake and so forth, and incorporation into human beings through the plants. So it works really well, maybe disturbingly well, because you take, so this is the root tip, and if you look inside it, well, the nanodiamonds are undergoing Brownian motion inside the root tip. And there are a lot of interesting things you can study with this, including, well, in a forest fire, you get paramagnetic impurities that are incorporated into the soil, or paramagnetic things that are incorporated into the soil, and this is known to contribute to plant aging, and so these are the kind of things that we want to study with this, including a microplastic uptake. Okay, so I'm going to now come to this main focus of today's talk. I'm going to tell you a little bit about new kind of microfluidic assays that you can make with nanodiamonds that are incorporated into microdroplets. So we became very interested in these things called microdroplets. These are emulsions. So this is water in oil, or oil in water. So you can imagine this is a water droplet in oil. And because I told you about these nanodiamond particles, so easy, they're hydrophilic. You just put them in, and they go and stick inside the water. And, and so you can now make mobile sensors. So similar to what Suzanne was showing with atoms, now you can have a larger scale. This is a droplet, but the droplet can be charged, and you can move these droplets around in all kinds of patterns, which I'll show you briefly. And you can load these droplets with nanodiamond particles, and here they are undergoing Brownian motion. You can't see it so well here, but all these red dots are nanodiamond particles inside a droplet. Because the particles are hydrophilic, they don't escape the droplet, so they're kind of inside the water droplet. So here an example of these droplets. So this is a movie of them. They are all loaded with nanodiamonds, but it's quite amazing, this technology. It's highly monodispersed. So all the droplets are exactly the same size. Okay, so I'm going to go back a sec here. So this is water and oil, and all the droplets are almost exactly the same size, and they're loaded with almost exactly the same number of nanodiamonds. And they flow around, and then you can charge them. You can change the spacing between the droplets. You can move them around by various techniques with microfluidics, as shown here. And so now you have essentially a mobile quantum sensor, if you like, because you've got these sensors inside these droplets which you can move around. So here are examples. So you can move them in a train, like a linear chain, or you can change the spacing between them. You can do all kinds of tricks with microdroplets. So these are the microdroplets loaded with nanodiamonds, and you can see them in a fluorescence movie, and you can see them loaded a lot with nanodiamonds. So what can you do with this? So, well, I'm just going to show you some before that. So some other things you can do. So you can load them with different sizes of particles. The important thing to note is that the particles don't leave the droplet. They're just naturally hydrophilic, so they just are inside all the time. You can track the motion of the particles inside the droplet. So there's a few particles inside the droplet, and you can track them, and it turns out that it's not Brownian. It's actually more like a Levy distribution. This is a single particle in a droplet. Because this particle is so bright, you can actually see a single particle inside. You can also put cells inside the same droplet. So the quantum sensors can cohabit the same space as single cells. So you can have yeast cells. This yeast cell in the same droplet with nanodiamond particles. The big picture of what we're going towards is flow cytometry, so to make a quantum-enhanced version of flow cytometry, which I will talk to you about briefly. So anyway, I'm going to skip over all the details, but I want to tell you that by using this flow, we can make very sensitive or more precise quantum sensors. So to just get there, I'm going to show you that if you were to just take nanodiamonds in a static droplet, this is the type of ODMR contrast that you'd get. So this is ODMR contrast as a function of time. This is a minute. And you can see it's around 2% or so. And the fluctuation is about 13% on this 2.5%, which is, might look interesting. But ultimately, the precision by which you can detect something, an analyte inside this droplet, is determined by how much precision you have in this measurement. And what we've been able to do, as I'll show you briefly, is we've been able to go from here to here. So really make this extremely precise. The trick is to use the flow of the droplets themselves, so actually the mobile nature of these quantum sensors, to enhance precision. So how does that work? So I'm going to just give you a brief idea of the experiment. So what we have is a flowing system of micro droplets, all with the same number of nanodiamonds, and we're going to look at them with an objective. So we're going to just collect it on a PMT, and then if you were to look over a long time, this is 600 seconds. You would see this. This is the photoluminescence. So you see the sort of oscillations here, and these oscillations are the flow of the droplet. So it turns out this flow is very, very easy to control to an extremely high degree. So the drift over about 10 hours is less than 1 hertz. And so you have this very high level of precision, or a very high amount of stability of the flow. And if you were to zoom into this window here, you see the photoluminescence, and you can see the droplet going out and in and out and in and out and in and so forth. So this is the droplet flow. And on top of the droplet flow, what we're going to do is we're going to apply microwaves at this fixed transition that I told you about. And so you can see that on this photoluminescence, on top of this droplet coming in and out, we have these little wiggles. And these wiggles are actually the nanodiamond photoluminescence getting modulated by the microwaves. So essentially, we have two sources of modulation that are applied simultaneously, one because of flow and one because of microwaves. And if you were to do a Fourier transform of this, this is seen on a log scale, then you'd note that you get these oscillations because of droplet flow. So this is droplet flow and harmonics. And then you get oscillations because of microwaves at 1 kilohertz. And then you have these side peaks, droplet plus microwave and droplet minus microwave. So it turns out that because of this double flow, you can essentially separate the nanodiamond signal from any other source of background. Dominant source of background, autofluorescence, room light, a little bit of background. So all of that gets suppressed, and you can only pick out the nanodiamond signal within the droplet. And this is the idea that you can get very high precision with. And here's the result. So this is a large amount of time. This is 8,000 or 10,000 seconds of experiments. 276,000 droplets, so a lot of droplets. And you can see that the precision over this is on the second digit of the ODMR contrast. So we can really get very high precision on this chemical measurement, let's say, on this ODMR contrast, which we can then use to say something about chemical environment of the droplet. This is an Allen variance plot for technical experts, but it basically just follows a 1/√T scaling over thousand seconds or so, which is quite remarkable as stability is concerned. So what can you do with this? So some easy things you can do are detect paramagnetic spins within the droplet, which is a starting point towards making more complicated assays. This is measurement of gadolinium, measurement of tempol. I'm not going to go into much detail, except to point out that the error bar on these plots is very small. I mean, about an order of magnitude smaller than other people in the literature. So this chart kind of compares quantum sensors of various types. This particular sensing modality that I told you about, and alternate means of sensing, like fluorescent sensors. This is for detection of gadolinium or tempol. So fluorescent sensors, EPR, and so forth. And we're comparing against two axes. So one is the sample volume, and the other is the analyte concentration. So what is the smallest amount of analyte you can detect in the smallest volume? So ideally, you want to be on the bottom left of this graph because you want to detect a small amount of analyte and a small amount of volume. And so we are currently here, and most of the conventional techniques, including fluorescence, are here. They need much larger volume. So I think there's a point to be made that even in the current day, quantum sensors can possibly add something that's beyond the state of the art compared to classical or normal other ways of detecting things. And in my mind, that is the important figure of merit. While we may love our quantum sensors, in the end, they have to do something better than what's possible already through competing methodologies. The other thing I wanted to point out is the amazingly low cost of these sensors. So whenever I used to talk about these things, and people would say, oh, you're putting diamond inside droplets, and you're putting 276,000 droplets, you must cost a fortune. Actually, it turns out the droplet volume is very low, and the nanodiamond cost is very low. So if you were to consider 1 hour of droplets, which is about 100,000 droplets, the volume is 26 microliters, and the total cost of diamond is 63 cents. So it's smaller than the cost of the oil that you would use in these experiments. So I think it's a really scalable technology that could possibly go into the field. Okay, so the last 5 minutes, I'm going to switch gears and talk about another interesting topic. And that is to say that, and I think there's been a lot of popularity about diamond as a sensor, and that's, I think, for good reason. And you can imagine that diamonds are a class of, wider class of semiconductor materials. And many of the alternate semiconductor materials have become popular as well. So silicon carbide, HBN now, gallium arsenide, silicon itself, you can make defects in them, and they have very similar properties. Many of them at cryogenic temperatures, but nonetheless, rather interesting. But broad class of semiconductor materials that have these same properties. But you can imagine there are also other types of materials which have similar properties and very similar level structures. So one is organic molecules, and that's something we've become very interested in. So a classic molecule, the kind of the, let's say, prototypical molecule is pentacene. And I'll describe a little bit about it. But then you can also imagine inorganic centers. So these are lanthanide elements, so cerium, europium, lanthanum, et cetera. And they also have multi-level, so they're also kind of QuDits systems, if you like. And so you might ask, what is the advantage of these classes of materials compared to the semiconductors? So in the semiconductor, you're actually making a defect in a lattice. On the other hand, in these materials, it is the molecule itself is the sensor, and the molecule itself is endowed with these properties. And using the powers of synthetic chemistry, it's possible to array these molecules in very specific ways that's almost impossible to do with semiconductors. And so what we want to leverage are first showing similar properties with molecules, but then also trying to make assemblies of these sensors using the powers of synthetic chemistry. So the molecule we became interested in, as I told you, is pentacene. And this is doped in in this particular example, is doped in a solid matrix, which is a paraterphenol. It's similar to naphthalene, if you like mothballs. And the advantage of these materials is you can grow them very, very large. Now, everyone working with diamond knows that the diamonds are really tiny. There's only one supplier. And here we can grow our own crystals, and we can grow them very large, like macroscopic in size. And it turns out if you go into the details, the energy level structure of this pentacene molecule is very similar to NV in diamond. It's almost exactly identical, except the ground state is a singlet, and the metastable state is a triplet at 3 levels, which is inverse of what happens in diamond, where the ground state is a triplet, and this metastable state is a singlet. But apart from that, it's pretty much identical. And so we were able to show in recent work that you can do very similar things that you can do with diamond, almost exactly identical. Now you can do it in these organic molecules. So this is ODMR, very narrow ODMR spectrum, and ODMR is a function of magnetic field. And some properties of these materials are listed here. So very narrow line width, and that's because actually every molecule acts as a sensor, and you don't have these. For experts in the audience with diamond, you have these thing called P1 centers, which are not NV but nitrogen. And so there is no equivalent here. You can grow very large crystals at very low cost. The total cost of a crystal like this is probably $100 to grow. And very importantly, because the ground state is a singlet, if you turn off the laser, the electron disappears. Okay, this is a very subtle point, but it has very high implications. So if you shine light, the electron is produced transiently, and the electron is produced in this triplet state, and that's what gets spin polarized. If you turn off the laser, or you wait a little bit of time, the electron goes in the singlet, it becomes diamagnetic, and as far as the nuclear spins are concerned, the electron disappears. As a result, even at close to room temperature, the T1 exceeds many 100 hours for pentacene. 100 hours is a very important, so 800 hours here is basically 2.5 months, which means that if you spin polarize the protons, you can go to Hawaii and have a vacation and come back, and the spins remain polarized. So it's a rather amazing resource that I believe not as well exploited yet in the community, and this is so it takes only about a few minutes to spin polarize these protons, and then you can just keep them there for hundreds of hours. Okay, so maybe my last slide, I want to say that you can do things that are conventionally done in the NV center community, but now you can do it with these molecules. And for example, you can measure temperature, you can measure pressure with these, using the 3-level nature of these spins, and the fact that these 3 levels are sensitive to temperature and pressure in very specific ways. And basically, diamond is a good temperature sensor and a pressure sensor, but well, diamond is a very hard lattice. On the other hand, the lattice here is very weak, and so it turns out that it deforms more easily, and therefore is a much better temperature and pressure sensor than diamond. Okay, so let me just leave it there, and I'm also out of time. So maybe on my last slide, I want to say that the whole power of these materials is that it's possible to now arrange them in more complicated shapes than just a defect in a lattice. So this is a collaboration with my colleague Jeff Reimer, where he's been able to make these things called metal organic frameworks with a, not pentacene here, but a equivalent, if you like, a thing called porphyrin, which has very similar properties. And this is arranged in this rather amazing three-dimensional structure, very easy to synthesize. It's got pores that are tunable. And now you can imagine that you've got quantum sensors lining the walls of this material. You can bring guest molecules inside it and either sense them or spin polarize them. And just the power of synthetic chemistry to be able to achieve macroscopic objects that are arrayed in very specific and controllable ways is, I think, a power that's yet to be fully exploited. So let me conclude by saying that I told you about quantum sensors. Based on spin, these sensors are easily deployable because they can be locked into these nanoparticle shapes, and you can put them where you want, 3D printing, advanced manufacturing. You can put them inside droplets. Because they're hydrophilic, and then you can make flow-based sensors with them, and we argue that they are better than the state-of-the-art other ways by which you can do similar sensing, at least for this limited class of things that you're trying to sense. And it's not limited to diamond, but can be expanded to other classes of material, especially these chemical systems, I think, are very exciting. Okay, so let me thank my group. These are all the people who did the work, and funding agencies. And thanks for your attention. And maybe I would say that we have positions at Berkeley if you're interested in this. Berkeley is a nice place with great sunsets. Okay.